The autumn breeze gently caressed the fallen leaves, accompanying the steps of three figures entering the heart of the forest. Maria, an elderly woman with silver hair and a face etched with the wrinkles of time, walked between her two adult children, Daniel and Elena. Each of them carried an invisible weight on their shoulders, a burden that Maria could not fully understand. Maria had always been a strong and kind woman. Her husband, Don Antonio, had been a successful and respected businessman, leaving behind a considerable inheritance upon his death. A vast estate, properties in the city, and a large sum of money in the bank were part of his legacy. For Maria, these assets represented not only the financial security of her family, but also the memories of a life built with love and effort. But for Daniel and Elena, the inheritance seemed to have taken on another meaning, one that Maria was just beginning to glimpse. Daniel, tall and serious-faced, kept his face impassive, but his eyes revealed a poorly concealed uneasiness. Elena, shorter and with an elusive gaze, seemed to avoid any eye contact with her mother, responding in monosyllables whenever Maria tried to start a conversation. "Children, where are we going?" Maria asked for the third time, her voice laden with a mixture of concern and confusion. "It's a surprise, Mother," Daniel replied without looking at her, quickening his pace. The silence that followed was uncomfortable, broken only by the crunching of leaves beneath their feet and the whisper of the wind through the branches. Maria felt that something was not right. The forest, which had always been a place of happy walks and family moments, now seemed like a labyrinth of shadows and mystery. Don Antonio's inheritance had been a source of veiled tension between the siblings. Although they never said it openly, Maria knew that both felt that the distribution of the assets had not been entirely fair. But Maria trusted that family love would prevail over greed. At least, that was what she hoped for. As they progressed, the density of the trees increased, darkening the path and adding to the sense of isolation. Maria tried once again to break the silence. "Daniel, Elena, I would really like to know what is going on." This time, Elena stopped and looked at her mother, her face reflecting a deep sadness. But before she could say anything, Daniel intervened. "We're almost there, Mother. Just a little further." The walk continued, each step seeming heavier than the last. Maria noticed how her children barely spoke to each other, lost in their own thoughts. The sadness and tension were palpable, like a dark cloud enveloping them. They reached a small clearing, surrounded by tall, shady trees. The forest, which had previously seemed familiar and welcoming, now rose like a labyrinth of uncertainty and fear. Maria, leaning on her cane, looked around, trying to make sense of the situation. "Mother, we have a surprise for you," Daniel said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Can I know what it is?" asked Maria, trying to hide the anxiety in her voice. "Just wait here a moment. We won't be long," Elena replied, her tone sweet but forced. Daniel and Elena hugged her quickly, a gesture more mechanical than affectionate. Then, without giving her time to react, they went back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows of the trees. Maria was left alone, feeling the silence grow heavier. The clearing, in the waning light of dusk, became colder and more desolate. Maria looked around, expecting to see her children return at any moment. However, minutes passed, and the forest remained silent. The uneasiness in her chest turned into a knot of anxiety. She began to pace back and forth, her steps slow and heavy. Reality began to set in. Her children were not coming back. They had brought her there to abandon her. She felt as if an invisible hand was squeezing her heart, making her breathing erratic. She sat down on the ground, unable to stand any longer from the shock. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of memories and emotions. She remembered the times she had cared for Daniel and Elena, their childhood laughter, the happy family moments. She couldn't understand how they had gotten to this point. The shadows of the forest lengthened and darkness began to envelop the clearing. Maria felt the cold penetrate her bones, but the pain of betrayal was even more acute. She closed her eyes, letting the tears roll down her cheeks. She had dedicated her life to her children, and now they had left her alone, without explanation, without goodbye. The sun disappeared completely, plunging the forest into impenetrable darkness. Night sounds began to fill the air, the rustling of leaves, the creaking of branches under the weight of invisible animals, and the distant hooting of an owl. Maria felt fear growing in her chest, each sound amplifying her sense of loneliness and vulnerability. "Daniel! Elena! Where are you?" she shouted, her voice echoing into nothingness. There was no answer. The echo of her words was lost in the silence of the forest, returning to her only the confirmation of her isolation. Maria leaned on her cane, trying to decide what to do. The cold enveloped her, biting her skin and numbing her limbs. Her strength was ebbing away, but she knew that staying in one place could be even more dangerous. She began to walk, staggering slightly with each step. The ground was uneven and tree roots protruded like traps in the darkness. Every time she stumbled, she felt a twinge of pain in her knees and hips, reminding her of her age and fragility. But she kept going, driven by a mixture of fear and desperation. "How could they do this to me?" she murmured to herself, her words broken with emotion. Her thoughts were a whirlwind of memories and pain. She remembered the sleepless nights caring for Daniel when he was a baby, and the stories she used to tell Elena before bed. Every sacrifice she had made for them, every moment of love and dedication now seemed like a cruel joke. "It can't be true," she told herself again and again. "My children wouldn't do something like that." But the reality of her situation was undeniable. They had taken her to the forest and abandoned her. The reason for their actions eluded her, filling her mind with unanswered questions. Was she a burden to them? Had she done something to deserve this? Doubts piled up, feeding her despair. The cold was getting more intense. Maria paused for a moment, her trembling hands adjusting the scarf around her neck. She felt the weight of fatigue in every fiber of her being, but she knew she had to keep going. The alternative, to stand still and wait, was not an option. "Please, my God, help me," she whispered to the starry sky, hoping for a miracle. The stars twinkled indifferently, offering little comfort in their vast and relentless expanse. Maria continued her struggle, each step a battle against fatigue and pain. Her thoughts turned to her deceased husband. She remembered his strength and his love, and wished with all her heart that he were there to guide her. "I need you," she said softly, feeling the tears freezing on her cheeks. Time seemed to stretch endlessly in the darkness. Every minute felt like an eternity. Maria kept calling her children, though her voice weakened with each attempt. The hope that they would answer faded with the passing hours. The reality of her situation settled, heavy and painful. Finally, exhausted and without strength, Maria let herself fall to the leaf-covered ground. The cold of the ground seeped through her clothes, but she no longer had the energy to go on. She closed her eyes, drifting into a restless, nightmare-ridden sleep. In her dreams, she saw the faces of Daniel and Elena, but they were distant, unattainable. The light of dawn was just beginning to filter through the leaves of the trees when Maria awoke, her joints stiff and her body aching from the night on the cold forest floor. She was trying to get up when she heard footsteps approaching. She looked up and saw a young lumberjack who stopped jumped when he saw her. "Ma'am, are you okay?" asked the young man with a worried voice. "Not very well, son," replied Maria, her voice trembling both from the cold and from emotion. The young man, Lucas, knelt beside her, offering his jacket to warm her. Carefully, he helped her to her feet, his hands firm but gentle. "Let me help you. My cabin is not far. There you can rest and warm up," Lucas said, in a tone that conveyed confidence and serenity. Maria looked at him suspiciously at first, but the warmth in his eyes convinced her. She didn't have many options, and the desperation of her situation led her to accept his help. Lucas guided her along the forest path, his presence a beacon of safety amid the uncertainty. "What were you doing here alone?" Lucas asked as they walked. Maria hesitated a moment before answering, but finally decided to trust him. She told him her story, the betrayal of her children and the abandonment in the forest. Lucas listened in silence, his eyes reflecting empathy and understanding. "I can't believe anyone would do that to their own mother," Lucas finally said, his voice heavy with contained indignation. "I don't want to believe it either," Maria replied, her words barely a whisper. The way to Lucas's cabin was long, but the conversation helped distract Maria from her pain. Lucas told her about his life in the forest, how he had found peace in nature after his mother's death. His words were simple but sincere, and each sentence built a bridge of trust between them. When they reached the cabin, Maria felt instantly comforted. The small wooden structure was well kept and cozy. Lucas helped her to sit near the fire and made her a cup of hot tea. Maria took the cup in her trembling hands, letting the warmth spread through her body. "Thank you, Lucas. I don't know how to thank you for this," Maria said, her eyes filled with gratitude. "You don't have to thank me for anything. It's the right thing to do," Lucas replied, sitting down opposite her. "No one should go through what you've been through." Maria nodded, feeling a mixture of relief and sadness. Although her children had betrayed her, the kindness of a stranger restored some of her faith in humanity. As she drank her tea, she began to feel stronger and more determined to face her situation. Over the next few days, Maria and Lucas shared many conversations. He taught her about life in the forest, showing her how to chop wood and prepare simple but nutritious meals. Their relationship grew slowly, based on respect and mutual understanding. Maria began to see Lucas not only as a savior, but as a friend. One afternoon, while they were gathering firewood, Lucas stopped and looked at Maria seriously. "Maria, I've been thinking. You can't stay here indefinitely. We need to find a way to resolve this with your children. I can't let them live with that betrayal on their conscience," Lucas said, his voice firm. "You're right, Lucas. I can't run from this forever. But what can I do?" asked Maria, the doubt evident in her tone. "First, you need to regain your strength and clarity. Then, we can think about how to confront your children. But remember, you're not alone in this," Lucas replied, placing a hand on Maria's shoulder. Maria felt a wave of gratitude and determination. With Lucas by her side, she knew she could face any challenge. The betrayal of her children had been a devastating blow, but Lucas's kindness and support gave her renewed hope. As she looked at the clear sky, she felt that perhaps the future still held possibilities for redemption and love. Lucas's cabin was a cozy refuge in the middle of the forest. The wooden walls, adorned with tools and memories of his life as a lumberjack, gave the place a feeling of warmth. The scent of pine filled the air, mingling with the soft crackle of the fire in the fireplace. In contrast to the cold and threatening exterior, the cabin was a sanctuary of tranquility and security. "It's a very nice place, Lucas," Maria said, observing the details with a faint smile. "Thank you. I built it with my own hands after my mother passed away. It's my refuge, Lucas replied, pouring 2 cups of hot tea. They sat in front of the fire, the heat enveloping them and creating an atmosphere conducive to conversation. Maria, with her hands around the cup, began to talk about her youth, how she had grown up in a small town surrounded by mountains. Her voice, though sometimes trembling, was full of nostalgia and sweetness. My parents were farmers. I remember the cold winters, all of us around the fire telling stories and laughing. They were difficult times but full of love, Maria said, her eyes shining with memories. Lucas listened attentively, his gaze reflecting empathy. He shared his own stories, talking about his mother and how she had taught him everything he knew about the forest. The loss of his mother had left a deep void, but life in the cabin and nature had given him a new perspective. The forest is my home now. Here I find peace and purpose, Lucas said, his voice firm and sincere. As the days passed, Maria and Lucas continued sharing their lives through long conversations and daily chores. Lucas taught Maria how to chop wood and prepare simple meals with the forest's resources. Each activity was an opportunity to strengthen their bond and for Maria to regain her sense of usefulness and purpose. Sitting by the fire once more, Maria began to laugh for the first time since her abandonment. They had been recalling a funny story from Lucas's childhood, and Maria's bubbly laughter filled the cabin with unexpected joy. I haven't laughed like that in a long time, Maria said, wiping away a tear of happiness. It's good to hear you laugh, Maria. Here, in the forest, there's no place for constant sadness. Nature teaches us to move on, Lucas replied, smiling. The conversations became deeper and more personal. Maria talked about her children, how she had always tried to give them the best, despite the difficulties. Lucas, in turn, shared the pain of losing his mother and the loneliness he had felt before finding solace in the forest. It's hard to understand why our loved ones hurt us, but I believe there's always an opportunity to heal and forgive, Lucas said, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. I hope you're right. I want to believe that my children can change, that there's a possibility of reconciliation, Maria replied, her voice laden with hope and fear. Over time, Lucas's company and the peace of the forest began to heal Maria's wounds. She found solace in daily routines and evening conversations. Her laughter became more frequent, and her sadness, though still present, began to fade little by little. One afternoon, as they were gathering firewood together, Maria stopped and looked at Lucas with an expression of gratitude. Lucas, I don't know how to thank you for all this. You've given me back the hope and strength to go on, Maria said, her words sincere and full of emotion. You don't need to thank me, Maria. We've helped each other. You've also taught me a lot about life and resilience, Lucas replied, placing a hand on her shoulder. The cabin, with its warmth and security, had become much more than a physical refuge for Maria. It was a place of emotional renewal and new beginnings. And in that corner of the forest, between conversations by the fire and daily chores, Maria found a new family in Lucas, a bond based on respect, understanding, and friendship. Thus, day by day, the pain of abandonment began to be replaced by the hope of a better future. In the warmth of the cabin and in Lucas's kindness, Maria discovered that there's always room for love and redemption, even in the darkest of times. One afternoon, as the sun gently filtered through the cabin windows, Maria sat at the wooden table, her hands trembling slightly. Lucas, noticing her uneasiness, approached and took a seat opposite her. Lucas, there's something I need to show you, Maria said, her voice barely a whisper. She took a yellowed letter from the pocket of her coat. Her hands shook as she unfolded it, revealing the words written by her late husband. Lucas watched in silence, perceiving the mixture of emotion and pain on Maria's face. "My husband, before he died, left me this letter," Maria began, her voice breaking. "In it, he gave me instructions on what to do if I ever found myself in danger." Lucas nodded, his eyes fixed on Maria's, full of understanding and patience. "I want you to read it," Maria said, holding out the letter. Lucas took the letter carefully, reading the words aloud. As he progressed, his brows furrowed in concentration. "My dear Maria," Lucas read, "if you ever find yourself in a difficult situation, look for Antonio Ramos. He is a trusted lawyer and knows what to do to protect you. Do not hesitate to contact him. Trust him as you would trust me." Lucas looked up, meeting Maria's tear-filled eyes. "Antonio Ramos?" Lucas asked. "Where can we find him?" "He lives in the village, a few kilometers from here. But I can't go alone, Lucas. I need your help," Maria replied, her voice full of hope and fear. Lucas nodded resolutely. "Don't worry, Maria. I'll go find Antonio Ramos and bring him here. You stay and rest. I'll be back soon," he said with determination. Maria watched as Lucas prepared for the journey. He packed a small backpack with supplies and made sure he had everything he needed for the road. Before leaving, Lucas approached Maria and gently squeezed her hand. "Everything will be all right, Maria. I'll be back soon," he said, looking into her eyes. "Thank you, Lucas. Be careful," Maria replied, her words filled with gratitude and worry. Lucas left the cabin, and Maria watched him disappear among the trees. The forest, which had been a place of solace and security, now seemed full of uncertainty. Anxiety grew within her as she awaited Lucas's return. The path through the forest was challenging, but Lucas moved forward with determination. The sounds of the forest were a constant backdrop, the singing of birds, the crunching of leaves beneath his feet, and the whisper of the wind through the trees. Each step brought him closer to his destination, and the urgency of his mission spurred him on. "Antonio Ramos," he murmured to himself, trying to recall every detail of the letter. The sun was beginning to set when he finally reached the village. He went straight to the lawyer's office, a modest but well-kept building. He knocked on the door and waited, his heart pounding. The door opened and a grey-haired man appeared, with wise eyes and a kind face. "How can I help you?" the man asked, studying Lucas with curiosity. "Are you Antonio Ramos?" Lucas asked, his voice firm. "Yes, I am." "Who are you?" replied the lawyer, in a tone that mixed caution and kindness. "My name is Lucas. I come on behalf of Maria. She needs your help," Lucas said, handing him the letter. Antonio Ramos took the letter and read it in silence. His eyes hardened slightly as he grasped the gravity of the situation. "I understand. I'll prepare what's necessary and find her," said Ramos, his voice firm. Lucas nodded, feeling palpable relief. They had taken the first step toward resolving the situation. "Thank you, Mr. Ramos. I'll let Maria know," Lucas replied. The journey back to the forest felt lighter, despite the darkness that was beginning to envelop the landscape. Lucas knew they were one step closer to protecting Maria and confronting the betrayal of her children. When Lucas reached the cabin, he found Maria waiting for him anxiously. Her eyes lit up when she saw him enter. "Lucas, did you find him?" Maria asked, her voice full of hope. "Yes, I found him. Everything will be all right, Maria," Lucas replied, smiling confidently. Maria felt a wave of relief and gratitude. The morning was cold and clear when Lucas and Maria set out on their journey to the village. Lucas had returned the previous night with encouraging news from Antonio Ramos, the trusted lawyer. Maria, with a mixture of nervousness and determination, leaned on Lucas's arm as they made their way along the forest path. Upon reaching the village, they went directly to Ramos's office. The building, though modest, exuded a sense of authority and security. The walls were lined with law books and documents, a testament to the lawyer's knowledge and experience. Antonio Ramos received them with a warm and professional smile. "Maria, Lucas, please come in," Ramos said, gesturing for them to take a seat. Maria, still somewhat nervous, sat down in front of Ramos's desk. Lucas took a seat beside her, ready to offer his support. "Maria, I've reviewed the documents you gave me," Ramos began, his tone serious. "Your husband was very careful in making sure you were protected. I have here the details of the legal safeguards he put in place." Maria nodded, feeling the tension in the air rise. Ramos opened a folder full of papers and began to explain. "Your husband, before he passed away, spoke to me about his concerns. He knew that your children might try something, so he established a series of clauses in his will. These clauses limit their ability to administer the assets without your consent," Ramos explained, his voice clear and firm, pointing to several documents. Maria listened intently. Each word from Ramos reinforced the image of her husband as a foresighted and protective man. Her children's betrayal had been a devastating blow, but knowing that her husband had taken steps to protect her gave her a new sense of strength and resolve. "Furthermore," Ramos continued, "there's a clause stating that if your children attempt to manipulate or falsify documents, the assets will be automatically transferred to a charitable foundation. This measure ensures that any attempt at fraud is punished." Maria felt a lump in her throat, a mixture of relief and sadness. Her husband had thought of everything, even the possibility of his own children betraying her. "What can I do now?" Maria asked, her voice firm despite the emotion. Ramos looked at her seriously. "First, we must file these documents with a judge to ensure that the clauses of the will are enforced. I would also recommend obtaining a restraining order against your children to protect you from any attempts at coercion or violence." Lucas, who'd been listening in silence, interjected. "Maria, we're with you on this. You're not alone. We'll do whatever it takes to see that justice is done," he said, his voice full of conviction. Maria looked at Lucas and then at Ramos, feeling a wave of gratitude and determination. For the first time since she was abandoned in the forest, she felt in control of her life. "Thank you, Ramos. Thank you, Lucas. I'm ready to do whatever it takes," Maria said, with newfound resolve in her voice. Ramos nodded, pleased with her response. "Good, Maria. We will begin legal proceedings immediately. I will keep the judge informed, and we will prepare for any eventuality," Ramos said, putting the documents away in his folder. They spent the rest of the day in Ramos's office discussing the details of the case and preparing the necessary documents. Maria felt more secure with each step they took. Each signature and each decision brought her closer to justice. As evening fell, Maria and Lucas returned to the cabin. The way back, though tiring, felt lighter. Maria, though weary, had a new spark of hope in her eyes. "Lucas, thank you for everything you've done for me. I don't know how I would have faced this without you," Maria said as they sat by the fire in the cabin. "Maria, you're a strong woman. You just needed a little support to remember your own strength," Lucas replied, smiling. That night, as the fire crackled softly, Maria realized that although the road to justice and reconciliation would be long and arduous, she was not alone. With Lucas's help and Ramos's guidance, she had the hope and determination to face whatever challenges lay ahead. In the warmth of the cabin and the kindness of her new allies, Maria found the courage to move forward, confident that truth and justice would prevail. Daniel and Elena arrived at the notary's office with a confidence that bordered on arrogance. They were convinced that everything would go according to their plans. However, upon crossing the office door, they did not expect to find a situation that would drastically change their expectations. Antonio Ramos, Maria's lawyer, was waiting for them. He greeted them with a firm and professional look. "Good morning, gentlemen," Ramos said, gesturing to the chairs in front of his desk. "Please have a seat." The siblings exchanged a knowing glance before sitting down. Daniel was the first to speak. "We are here to formalize the procedures for our father's inheritance," he said, in a tone that was intended to be confident. Ramos observed them calmly before responding. "I understand. However, before we proceed, there's something you should know," he said, opening a folder with documents. The silence in the room was palpable. Ramos took out several papers and placed them on the table. "Your father, before he passed away, established certain clauses in his will to protect the interests of your mother. These clauses limit your ability to administer the assets without her consent," Ramos explained, his voice clear and firm. Elena frowned, incredulous. "What does that mean?" she asked, her voice tinged with impatience. "It means that you cannot access your father's assets without the express authorization of your mother, and any attempt to manipulate or falsify documents will result in the transfer of all assets to a charitable foundation," Ramos replied, looking them straight in the eye. Incredulity and frustration were reflected on the faces of Daniel and Elena. Daniel rose from his seat, visibly enraged. "This is ridiculous," he exclaimed, banging his fist on the table. "How could our father do something like that?" Ramos remained calm, his voice unwavering. "He did it to protect his wife and ensure that his wishes were respected," he said firmly. "And I have clear instructions to enforce these clauses." Elena, trying to maintain her composure, looked at her brother before speaking. "There has to be some way to fix this. We can't accept these conditions," she said, her voice trying to sound conciliatory. It was at that moment that the office door slowly opened and Maria entered. Her figure, though frail, radiated a quiet resolve. Her eyes, filled with a mixture of sadness and determination, fixed on her children. "There's nothing to fix, Elena," Maria said, her voice firm but serene. "Your father's clauses are clear and are there to protect me." Daniel turned to his mother, his expression a mixture of anger and bewilderment. "Mother, this doesn't make sense. We just want what's rightfully ours," he said, his tone lower but full of frustration. Maria looked at him with deep sadness. "What's rightfully yours?" she repeated, shaking her head. "What your father and I wanted was a united and loving family. But you chose to betray me, to abandon me in the forest as if I were a burden." Elena, her eyes filled with tears, tried to approach her mother. "Mother, it wasn't our intention to hurt you. We thought that," she began, but her voice broke. "You thought you could manipulate me, take advantage of me," Maria interrupted, her voice sharp. "But I'm not the same defenseless woman you abandoned. I've found strength in places I never imagined. And, with the help of people like Lucas and Mr. Ramos, I've learned to defend myself." The silence that followed her words was thick. Daniel and Elena looked at each other, the reality of their failure sinking in. "Mother, please," Daniel said, his voice now pleading. Maria held his gaze firmly. Maria looked at her children with a mixture of severity and love. Daniel and Elena, visibly dejected, waited anxiously for her words. "I'll give you a chance to redeem yourselves," Maria finally said, her voice firm. "But it won't be easy. You will have to prove with actions, not words, that you are willing to change." Daniel nodded slowly, while Elena wiped a tear that rolled down her cheek. "Whatever it takes, Mother. We're willing to do whatever it takes," Daniel said, a new determination in his voice. "Good," Maria replied, softening her tone slightly. "You will work on the farm. There's a lot to do to maintain it, and you will need to make an effort. I want to see your commitment and dedication." The following days were a constant test for the siblings. From dawn to dusk, they devoted themselves to the farm work under Maria's watchful eye. They chopped wood, tended to the animals, and repaired fences. Each task, however small, was an opportunity to show their sincerity and commitment. "Hard work has never been easy, but it's necessary," Maria would say, observing. The first month was especially difficult. Daniel and Elena, accustomed to a more comfortable life, faced physical exhaustion and frustration. But little by little, they began to adapt. The discipline and daily routine not only strengthened their bodies, but also their character. One day, while repairing a fence, Daniel turned to his sister. "I never thought this would be so hard," he admitted, wiping the sweat from his brow. "Me neither," Elena replied, "but every day I feel like we're learning something important. Maybe this is what we need to really change." Maria, watching from a distance, felt a glimmer of hope. Seeing her children working together, facing their challenges, was a step towards the redemption she so longed for. Their conversations became deeper, laden with remorse and a desire to make amends for the past. "Mother, I want you to know that we're truly sorry," Daniel said one night as they sat by the fire. "I know, son, but words only mean something if they are backed up by actions," Maria replied, her tone soft but firm. The months passed, and over time, the farm began to flourish. The plants grew strong, the animals were well cared for, and the land, which had once seemed barren, was now a symbol of renewal. Daniel and Elena's hard work and dedication were paying off, and, with each passing day, the family bond grew stronger. One afternoon, while harvesting the crops, Elena stopped and looked at her mother. "Thank you for giving us this opportunity, Mother. You have taught us the value of hard work and the importance of family," she said, sincerity in her voice. Maria smiled, feeling a deep peace. "I'm proud of you. You have shown that you can change, that you can be better." "That's what I've always wanted for you," she replied, her eyes filled with love. As time went by, the farm became a place of prosperity and unity. Maria, though increasingly frail, found solace in seeing her children transform. Her last days were peaceful, surrounded by the love and care of her family. One morning, Maria bid farewell to her children with a serene smile. "I will always be with you, in every corner of this farm, in every memory we shared," she said, her voice soft. Daniel and Elena, holding hands, promised to honor her legacy of love and forgiveness. Maria closed her eyes for the last time, leaving a legacy of redemption and hope. The farm continued to flourish, a living testament to the ability of people to change and heal. Daniel and Elena, united by their mother's love, carried on her legacy with pride and dedication, always remembering the lessons learned and the power of love and family. Hello, dear friends and followers. As we reach the conclusion of this tale, I want to leave you with a final thought that I hold close to my heart. Life is full of ups and downs, and no matter how difficult the times we go through, there is always a reason behind everything. Each trial and challenge we face is not in vain. Rather, they serve a greater purpose. These experiences shape us, strengthen our character, and prepare us for the blessings that are yet to come. If you found this story touching and want to continue enjoying more inspiring and moving content, I invite you to take a moment to like this video and subscribe to my channel. Thank you once again for being here, for listening, and for sharing this journey with me. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Until then, take care, stay hopeful, and remember that every challenge is an opportunity in disguise. See you soon.